In the 1980s, Manchester was a city caught between decline and rebirth. The factories were silent, unemployment was high, but out of the rubble came music, a sound and a culture that spread around the world. And at the centre of it was the Hacienda. When the Hacienda opened its doors in 1982, it was the dream of Tony Wilson and Factory Records. Inspired by the New York club scene, Wilson wanted to build something that Manchester had never seen before, a cathedral of music and nightlife. The Hacienda became the beating heart of the Manchester scene, where bands like the Happy Mondays fueled a youth culture revolution. But behind the music and lights, there was a darker story. Nightclubs weren't just about dancing. They were business. There were money. And in Manchester, that meant they became the territory of gangs. Because whoever controlled the doors controlled the city itself. The most feared family of them all were the Noonans. Desmond, Dominic and Damien. Damien in particular carried an aura of menace. To the average man he could appear calm, even approachable, but those who crossed him knew he could switch in an instant. When his temper snapped, he became an extremely dangerous man, and his outbursts were feared across Manchester's underworld. His reputation of violence made him one of the most intimidating men in the city. His brother Desmond, known simply as Desi, had an even darker reputation. Desi was the muscle of the family, an enforcer that thrived on intimidation, and a man often described as the hitman. He himself claimed to have killed, and those who lived under his shadows never doubted it.
I've got a bigger army than the police. We've got more guns than the police, silly bastards. I'm down to 25 murders. Well, a load of bollocks, innit? They reckon I'm behind most of the murders in Manchester.
And are you?
No.
Where Damien brought fear, Desi's cold brutality cemented the family's control. And together, the Noonans became Manchester's most feared crime family. And the Hacienda became the city's most valuable prize. And the Noonans wanted their share. But the Noonans weren't the only ones circulating the doors. From Cheetham Hill came Anthony White Tony Johnson. He was young, ambitious and fearless. Johnson was part of the Cheetham Hill gang. He was ruthless and flashy, and determined to make his mark on the Manchester nightlife. One night outside the Hacienda, White Tony pulled a gun at the doorman, who were linked to the Noonans, during an angry dispute. It was a bold move, a public declaration that Cheetham Hill gang weren't afraid of the Noonans, or anyone else. But it also lit the fuse. From that moment, the rivalry escalated. The doors weren't just guarded by bouncers, they were guarded by soldiers, and the fight for control turned deadly. From Salford came another threat, Paul Doyle, known as One Punch Doyle. His name came from his reputation. He could knock people out for fun. A wrecking ball of violence, Doyle was unpredictable. He was fiery and brutal. On the doors, his presence alone brought enough to intimidate the crowd. And beside him stood a man called Graeme Boardman. He was bigger, stronger, and more relentless. Boardman was a fighter who inspired fear even in Manchester's hardest men. It was public knowledge that Boardman could take anyone on, fighting off 5 or 6 people at once. And he even threatened the Noonans face to face himself. And the fact that they were wary of him shows just how much respect and fear he carried.
My first night, I go down there. I'm working for somebody on the thing, yeah, getting paid. Then I go down there, very handsome kid, 30-inch waist, 16.5 stone, on the door there, called Graeme Boardman. Right, talk, unbelievable. You'll think he was a professor. Now, when I first landed, he goes, "Oh, Paul, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard about your reputation, blah." Now, I was taught back by his mannerism. Little did I know, this guy is the biggest lunatic on the planet. But this night, we got told to bar Massey's firm. There's another firm in there called the Ugly Firm. Skinheads was out in them days. They're all skinheaded off. All, they suited the name, the Ugly Firm, because they was all ugly. They was all leaving the place. One stopped and said, "Doyle, what are you doing on here?" Now, I'm not going to argue with anyone. I know what's going to come. So I onslaughted him. As I'm onslaughting him, I'm looking at Graeme massacring these other 10, 15 lads, just going through him like a knife into butter, hot knife into butter.
Graeme Boardman's story ended in mystery after allegedly being kidnapped abroad, and he was never seen again. His disappearance only added to his legacy. And then there was PaulMassey. Raised on Salford's Odsall estate.
A few occasions I know people have tried to... I know people who will be watching this and are friends and plan to take me out. Think I don't know. I'm just laughing at them. I'm laughing. I shake their hands still. Because I know they ain't got the arse right because they know what can happen after. But I know I'm on him. And what they don't realise, I'm on yous.
Massey came through the same environment as Doyle, but his ambition stretched further. From petty crime to armed robbery, he grew into one of Manchester's most notorious figures. He was calculated and organised, and charismatic. He understood the business side of crime, and to him, the nightclub doors weren't just about fights, they were about running narcotics, collecting protection money, and controlling the flow of power across Manchester. He became known as Mr. Big, a name that reflected the respect and fear he commanded. And in the battle for the Hacienda, Massey wanted it all. By the early 1990s, the rivalries had reached boiling point. The Noonans were feared throughout the city. White Tony and the Cheetah Mill Gang, Paul Doyle and Boardman representing Salford's muscle, and Massey with his ambitious stand to take over them all. They all knew each other. They all drank in the same pubs. But make no mistakes, they weren't allies, and the Hacienda doors were the prize. Every night became a show of force. Rival gangs, rival reputations, all clashing for the same threshold. The tensions exploded in 1991 when White Tony Johnson was shot dead outside the Penny Black pub in Cheetah Mill. Just 22 years old, Johnson's killing sent shockwaves through the city. The brash young gangster, who once pulled a gun out on the Hacienda doormen, had been taken out. And the Noonans were accused. They were arrested and put on trial. But they walked free, acquitted of murder. And in the underworld, most believed the Noonans had made the move. The door wars had claimed its first major casualty, but inside, the club was collapsing under the weight of it all. Narcotics were everywhere. Violence was routine. Stabbing, shooting and intimidation. The Hacienda had become a war zone. When the Hacienda finally closed its doors in '97, some believed Manchester might finally breathe easier. The music had stopped. But shutting the club didn't end the wars. In truth, the closure was only the beginning. The battleground simply shifted. From the doors of the nightclub, to the streets, the pubs, the estates of Manchester and Salford. Men who'd fought the hardest for the Hacienda didn't fade away. They took what they'd learned. The networks, the connections, the money. and built empires from it. When the doors were gone, they looked wider. Protection rackets grew. Millions were made in cash that never touched the bank. And for the gangsters that rose to the top, the end of the club only gave them room to expand. PaulMassey stood in the centre of a new era. With his charisma and organisation, he moved beyond just another street figure. Massey controlled security firms, ran rackets, and became the face of Salford's underworld. Some saw him as a community man, helping others and locals, whilst others lived in fear. And by the 2000s, Mr. Big wasn't just a nickname, it was reality. The Noonans too used the years after the Hacienda to tighten the grip. There's his reputation as an enforcer. Damien became more of a mediator between crime families, but was still as volatile and violent as ever. And the connections across Manchester and the whole of the UK made him a family that nobody wanted to cross. They collected debts and spread their influence through Manchester's pubs and clubs. They had survived the door wars, and now they thrived in the aftermath. But not everyone survived to reap the rewards. White Tony, the young gangster, never lived long enough to build an empire. Shot dead outside the Penny Black pub. His death became a warning in Manchester's underworld. Rising too fast meant burning out quickly. White Tony's rivals carried on. Power growing, the money piling up. But he was gone. His story ending before it truly began. This was the reality of the Post-Hacienda years. For some, the closure opened up bigger doors, bigger fortunes. But for others, it was the end. The streets replaced the nightclubs, but the war carried on. Deadlier, richer, and more ruthless than ever before. And what followed in the years to come came a plethora of unforeseen casualties. Damien Noonan died in 2003, thrown from a quad bike in the Dominican Republic. Desi Noonan, stabbed to death in 2005. Anthony White Tony Johnson, gunned down in 1991. His killers never convicted. Graeme Boardman, banished abroad and never to be seen again. And PaulMassey, Mr. Big himself, assassinated in 2015 outside his Salford home with an Uzi in one of Britain's most shocking hits. One by one, the men who fought for the doors of all fell, some through violence and some through accidents. Some simply disappeared, but all of them ultimately paid the price. The Hacienda was built for a place of freedom and music, but its doors became the battlefield for the Noonans, for White Tony, for Paul Doyle and Boardman, and for Massey. The promise of power was irresistible. They believed the doors gave him control of the city, but in the end, the doors only led to one way: to prison cells, to courtrooms, to morgues, and to graves. Today the Hacienda is gone, replaced by apartments. Its cultural legacy is celebrated around the world, but its darker story lives on. A story of fear, rivalry, and downfall. Proof that in Manchester's underworld, the life of crime never really pays.